So we've all said and done things that we regret. We've all used our words in harmful ways, taken actions that hurt someone we care about. We all have things in our past that when we think about them, maybe we still cringe a little bit. Hopefully we've worked through them. Hopefully we've asked forgiveness of those we wronged. Hopefully we've come to a resolution that honored God and honored our neighbors, and we were able to move forward in a healthy way. But we're all familiar with that feeling, saying something, doing something that wounds another person, perhaps a person close to us. We all know what it feels like to hurt someone you love. It can be hard to know how to move forward. The guilt and the shame can be devastating, and for many of us, the worst part is how we imagine God looks at us as a result of our failure. And that must have been exactly what Peter was feeling in our story today. Welcome to the very uplifting 10th and final week of Lake Life, our summer sermon series where we're considering the most prominent events to take place in the ministry of Jesus on or around the lake known as the Sea of Galilee. And we'll be in John chapter 21 this morning. Feel free to turn there now if you'd like to follow along. John chapter 21. You may remember that when Jesus was standing trial before the Jewish authorities, Peter was asked by a servant girl there in the courtyard whether he was one of Jesus' disciples. And he responded, "No, I'm not." And again, someone said, "Are you sure you aren't one of his disciples?" And again, he responded, "I'm not." And yet, again, someone said, "I'm pretty sure I saw you in the garden with him." And Peter denied knowing Jesus for the third time, and the rooster crowed. And we're told that after this, he went away and wept bitterly. This is what happened the next time he saw Jesus. John chapter 21, verse 1. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. There's been a lot of debate about why Peter was going out to fish. Some people really tear Peter down for this. They say, he never should have gone fishing. He's returning to his old life. He's given up on faith. I don't think that's what Peter's doing at all. I don't think he had given up on Jesus, but I do think he had pretty much given up on himself. You can only imagine what he was carrying inside. He had betrayed his very best friend in his greatest hour of need. He had denied ever knowing him. He had denied he was his disciple. Push came to shove, and Peter turned into a coward. And he would have to live with that for the rest of his life. It had only been a few days, maybe a week, and Jesus had risen from the dead, but the betrayal still lingered in the air. There hadn't been any sort of resolution, any sort of reconciliation, any sort of conversation even about what happened. And the weight of this was felt by everyone. In fact, after Jesus' resurrection, the angel appears to Mary in the garden and says to her, "Go, tell his disciples and Peter." You ever notice that? Go, tell his disciples and Peter, because Peter wasn't one of the disciples anymore. He must have felt lost. He must have felt like the worst and loneliest person in the world. Depressed, numb, dead inside. You know what it's like when shame just consumes your every thought. You're completely paralyzed in your emotions. You don't know how to function, how to stumble forward, and you feel like a zombie. And so what do? You return to what's familiar, to life's mundane rhythms. I'm going fishing. I wonder if you've ever felt cut off from God. Maybe shame and guilt have dogged your steps, consumed your thoughts, and you've pretty much assumed God isn't going to forgive you because you wouldn't forgive you, and you just feel like it's over. You blew whatever purpose your life could have had, and you return to what's familiar. I'm going fishing. What you need, what we all need in those moments is a good friend. And thankfully, Peter had some good friends. They saw his shame. They saw his guilt. They knew that it ran so deep and it was so personal and it was so overwhelming that there was really nothing they could say. But sometimes in life's darkest moments, when there are no words, what we need is the presence of loved ones, people who know us, who love us, who see us for who we are, who don't define us by our worst moments and will stick by our side even when we're running from ourselves. Peter had some good friends. I'm going fishing. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, got into the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. There's this strange phenomenon that happened after Jesus rose from the dead where like sometimes people can't recognize him even if they're standing 2 feet away from him, but then sometimes they can. It's weird, but just go with it. The disciples don't realize that it's Jesus standing on the shore. There's this random guy on the beach and they've been fishing all night and they ain't caught nothing, right? And so he called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? And you can hear the frustration and the sharpness in their response. They've been working all night. They caught nothing. Now here's this random guy on the shore being like, hey, y'all caught anything? No, they said. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. This moment is all too familiar. They've lived it before. Their minds must have been taken back to 3 years earlier when they had fished all night and caught nothing. And then a stranger appeared and he stepped into Peter's boat and he told him to let down the nets for a catch. And the same thing happened. Gangbusters. Never seen so many fish. Do you remember Peter's response that first time? He fell on his knees and said, get away from me. I'm a sinful person. And Jesus said, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people. The day that God stepped into Peter's boat was the defining moment of his life. It changed everything. That was the day he was given purpose. The day he was given a mission. He was called to a new identity and a new family and a new life. And now, after having denied even knowing Jesus and probably feeling like he threw away any meaning or purpose his life could have had, he's back on the water. He's fished all night. He's caught nothing. And here a stranger shows up out of nowhere and says, let down the nets. And it must have all come flooding back. They look at the nets bursting with fish. John squints into the morning sunlight at the figure on the shore, smiles to himself, leans over to Peter and says, it's the Lord. Notice he didn't say it to the disciples. He didn't say it to Philip. He didn't say it to Thomas. He didn't say it to Nathanael. He said it to Peter because this moment is about Peter. Don't miss this. Right here, in the aftermath of Peter's greatest failure, Jesus recreates the miracle that he used to call Peter to follow him in the first place. Of all the ways he could have responded to the betrayal, of all the ways he could have responded to this situation, he recreates the miracle that sends the message, I'm still here. I still love you. I still want to borrow your boat. Some of us, in our own failures, think of God as angry, belligerent, condemning. We imagine him as some easily offended, short-tempered, vengeful tyrant. And whether we got that idea from an easily offended, short-tempered parent or some other traumatic life experience, I'm here to tell you this morning, God's not like that. This is who God is right here in this story. He's kind. He's gentle. He's sentimental. And he's more gracious and more loving than you would ever dare to believe. When you don't know how to forgive yourself, when you don't know how to carry on in the face of personal failure, when you've given up hope that life will ever have meaning again, he's reaching out saying, let's go back. Let's go back to where we started. Let's go back to when we first met. Let's go back to that moment when I told you who you were supposed to be. Let's go back to that moment when I gave you a new purpose and a new name and a new life. I know you messed up, and I know that the guilt and the shame won't leave you alone. I know you feel like it's over, but let's go back. Let's go back and start again together. I'm still here. I still love you. I still want to borrow your boat. And instead of telling Jesus to go away this time, Peter has the right response. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. So we get a little comic relief here. I mean, most of the time people take clothes off when they're jumping in the water, right? He's wrapping this like cotton wool robe around himself and then flinging himself into the water. You can imagine how difficult it would have been to try to swim in that. He's just not thinking straight. He's just kind of mindlessly reacting. But I love the playful sort of competitive sibling thing that Peter and John obviously had going on, because even in the midst of this really beautiful, emotional story about forgiveness and redemption, John just can't help himself. He has to poke some fun at Peter. Look at this. He says, the other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. Peter is frantically throwing one arm in front of the other, kicking his feet like crazy, sticking his head up to breathe, and the rest of the disciples are just like rowing along. Just probably like, Peter, come on, man. Like, it's right. We're actually going to beat you should we help him? No, just let him. He's working through some stuff. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you've just caught. So Jesus invites them to gather around the fire for breakfast. But I don't think Peter could have eaten much, to be honest. I don't think he would have been that hungry. I imagine he must have felt sick to his stomach, and I'm sure that as everyone else sat there eating, he was lost in that fire. You see, there are a ton of fires in the Bible, like a lot. But charcoal fire is a very specific Greek word. And it actually only shows up 2 places in the entire Bible. Right here and 3 chapters earlier, when Peter was warming himself by the fire the night he denied knowing Jesus. Notice that Jesus recreated the miracle that he used to call Peter in the first place. And so he recreates the moment of faith. But he also calls him to sit by the charcoal fire. He recreates the moment of failure. I'm still here. I still love you. I still want to borrow your boat. But we got to deal with this. We got to talk about this. This is the elephant on the beach with them. Everybody can feel it. And finally, Jesus breaks the silence in verse 15. He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And scholars are divided over what Jesus meant by these. There are a couple of options. For the sake of time, I'll tell you that I think he's referring to the fish. Because he says, Simon, son of John, which he never calls him. And we're reminded that Peter's dad, John, was a fisherman. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these fish? I called you away from this. I gave you a whole new identity, a whole new life, but you've gone back to this in your shame, and you have to decide. Do you want the life I'm offering, joy and peace and eternal purpose to change the world and help me establish my church? Or do you want to be a fisherman and make a steady income and just kind of go back home and forget about all this? What do you love most? What do you want most? Do you love me more than these? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. 3 times Peter had stood by the charcoal fire and denied knowing Jesus. And 3 times must he sit by the charcoal fire and answer the question from Jesus, do you love me? At every step of this story, Jesus is redeeming Peter's rejection. He is undoing Peter's greatest failure. By the fire, he turns the place of Peter's hell into the place of his healing. And I believe in my heart of hearts that this conversation saved Peter's life. Judas's shame had driven him to hang himself. What would Peter's fate have been had Jesus not come after him again? And the conversation is painful, yes, but it's necessary. Every time Jesus asks the question, it hurts Peter a little bit more, but he has to revisit the depth of that wound in order for it to heal. Otherwise, every time he heard a rooster crow for the rest of his life, he would have wept. And every time he saw a charcoal fire, he would have felt the sting of self-loathing in his soul. And every time he threw a net into the water, he would remember bitterly that he was supposed to be a fisher of men. The pain that Peter feels in Jesus' question is the work of the Spirit, cutting to the depths of that shame. This is grace. This is the hard, painful work of peeling back the layers of our guilt and letting the restorative, redemptive love of Jesus do its work. Simon, do you love me? And I have to wonder if the question wasn't so much meant for Jesus' understanding, because Peter said it himself. He said, Lord, you know all things. The question wasn't so much meant for Jesus' understanding, but for Peter's understanding. Simon, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Simon, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Simon, do you love me? Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Yes, Simon, I know you love me, but I see that guilt and that shame that you're carrying around. I see that self-inflicted wound on your soul. I see that proverbial noose that you've hung around your neck, and I just want to know, do you know that you love me? Sometimes, in the midst of our darkest moments, when shame has caused us to lose sight of who we are and whose we are, we need the voice of Jesus asking us, do you know that you love me? Do you know that you're not too far gone? Do you know that you're not disqualified from following me? Do you know that you're still mine? And the conversation ends with Jesus prophesying over Peter concerning his death. He tells him, very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And then he said to him, follow me. About 30 years after that morning on the beach, Peter was serving as the very first bishop of the church in Rome. This is the seat that eventually came to be called Papa or Pope. And when the Roman Emperor Nero sought to blame the Christians for a devastating fire that he himself had actually caused, he charged Peter as one of the conspirators and sentenced him to crucifixion. And the words of Jesus came to pass, that when Peter was an old man, someone else dressed him for eternity. They led him where he did not want to go, and he stretched out his hands to receive the nails. History tells us that when the soldiers led him to the cross, he made a request. Before we go there, I want to tell you that long before, on the night that Jesus was arrested, he told the disciples that he was about to go away. And Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later." And Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." When Peter said that, he wasn't ready to fulfill it. But 30 years later, after a lifetime of feeding the sheep of Christ's flock, he did exactly what he said he would do. He laid down his life for the Lord. And when the soldiers led him to the cross, history tells us that his last request was that they would crucify him upside down, because he said, "I'm not worthy to die in the same manner as my Lord." And so ends the story and the life of the Apostle Peter. But what about your story? What about your life? The uncomfortable truth is that each one of us have turned our backs on God. Each one of us have, in our own sin, embodied the spirit of Peter by the charcoal fire. Each one of us, in various times and various ways, in our fear and in our selfishness and in our pride, we have, through our choices and through our actions, we have declared, "I do not know him." And like Peter, we all must have our moment with Jesus by the fire. We all must answer that question. Do you love me? The good news of the gospel is that the one who asks is not angry. He's not vindictive or punishing. He's kind. He's gentle. He's making breakfast. And all the tired and hungry laborers are invited to sit and share a meal with him. We must find ourselves there too. And in the warmth of the morning sun, in the crackling of the charcoal fire, in the tear-filled eyes of every sinner who's found forgiveness, we can still hear that call. Those two words save Peter's life. They can save yours too. Follow me. Let's pray together. Lord, when we read this story, I'm struck by the feeling that we have been given a glimpse into a moment we have no business in. Such an intimate, personal moment, and yet resonant for each one of us. Father, in these next few moments that we share this morning, I pray that you would be in the room, that you would be moving among us, that you would help us to see that each one of us have betrayed you and denied you, that each one of us have been Peter in the courtyard, that each one of us are invited to sit by the fire with you and answer the question, do you love me? Lord, would you draw us to yourself this morning? In Jesus' name.